spaceship that I'm waiting for. I'm flying up to the stars.
So I grew up in a town called South Haven, Mississippi. It is just south of Memphis. So far northwest Mississippi is my home area. My parents, they're like a lot of kids' parents. Obviously, they are super influential in your life. My family situation, both parents grew up what I would say is probably poor by current standards. Dad was a factory worker. Firestone used to have a tire plant in Memphis, and so he worked there for a long time, and then the factory closed, and he ended up being a car salesman pretty much for the rest of his life. Mom was a nurse pretty much for her entire professional life. Now she didn't go to nursing until after my sister and I got started in school. Mm-hmm. So that's their background. They were super supportive of kind of this ambition that I had about doing some space stuff. But maybe a little bit later I can talk to you about someone who's really super impactful in my life with regards to that. I went to Mississippi State University, which is about 3 hours from the Space Center. I started out in aerospace engineering. Charm and good looks will get you through high school, but it will not get you through engineering school. So I finished with a degree in quantitative analysis from the business school. Okay. So a little peculiar that at that moment in time, I was a business grad, but got selected to go into the space program for the Air Force.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like even when you were a kid, you had interest in space.
Yeah.
Was that something that, like, does that go back so far that you don't even remember not thinking about space, or was there a catalyst that that you went, oh wow, space is cool?
Yeah. So I would say I don't really remember a time where I wasn't like fascinated with space.
Yeah.
Part of that is, so I was born in 1969 in March. So quite literally some of my earliest memories are of, seeing astronauts on television and stuff like that. So like I have vivid memories of Skylab as a really young guy. And I can remember as a little kid, pretending astronaut, you could see the countdown footage of astronauts, laying on their back and doing stuff, and then the rockets take off. And so as a real little kid, you get a chair laid on his back, and you're in the living room and you're pretending you're an astronaut. So that was that piece. My dad's family is from Northwest Alabama, a little farming community called Hodges, Alabama. It's about 2 hours from here, and my sister and I would spend summer weeks with my grandmother, and again, just a little farmhouse. My dad's sister, she had bought some encyclopedias for her younger brother. All right, so let me pause there for a second. My aunt, she was probably she was 16 years older than her youngest brother. By the time he was a young man, she was already off on her own, and as he entered high school, she bought a set of encyclopedias for him. Okay. Well, back at that moment in history, when you bought encyclopedias, you usually got some kind of free thing to incentivize you to buy encyclopedias. Right. The freebie that she got when she bought the encyclopedias was a small little set of books about the early astronauts.
Okay.
So in the bookcase in the farmhouse was the Encyclopedia Britannica and maybe 3 small little volumes about Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. And as a young guy who already kind of had this interest in space, you're in very, very rural Northwest Alabama. You, on a good day, you got grainy television footage from Birmingham or Tupelo. On the radio, your choice was farm radio, and the local AM religious stations. So there wasn't a whole lot of stuff to keep yourself entertained. I read those astronaut books over and over and over and over again. So that's kind of what got me going with that. Meanwhile, my dad's sister, my aunt, Rebecca, she and her husband, Fred, had relocated to Scottsboro, Alabama, which is up the road here from Huntsville. And when we would go visit, she would bring me to the Space Museum here. She'd bring me to the Rocket Center as a very young guy.
Yeah.
And many, many years later, this was in the early 80s, when Space Camp got started, she made us aware of it. That was about the same time my dad, as a factory worker, got laid off when the factory closed. He was out of work for probably about a year, and she paid to send me to space camp.
How old were you?
So I was 8th grade, so that would have been, I don't know, 10 or 12, I guess.
Yeah.
So space camp started, I think, in 82. I went to space camp in 83 and 84.
Wow.
So I went twice, and she paid both times. So, the catalyst really, I would say, was my Aunt Rebecca for a couple of reasons. One was, she bought the encyclopedias for her little brother, which happened to have the books that I just kind of read over and over again. When I would come and visit her in East Alabama, she would take me to the Rocket Center, the museum here, and then she paid for me to go to space camp. She didn't have kids of her own, so sure. She and my Uncle Fred doted on me and my sister, and then years later, I had 2 other cousins that they doted on, but they kind of lived through their nieces and nephews, and they kind of put me on this path.
What was space camp like? Because that's early days.
Yeah, that was super early. Like I said, space camp started, I think, in 82. And it was certainly by today's standard, next week the Inspiration 4 facility opens here, and it is a world-class facility. This facility back then was quite literally, minimalist by current standards, just a polished kind of like open bay floor with some things, you get around some folded up tables and talk. You'd have some time, you'd walk through the museum and have, conversations. But I remember spending time with Conrad Dannenberg. He was one of the last of von Braun's team that was still around and working in the area. So I got to interact with legends of the business as a very young kid, and it was just super, super fascinating. All of us that were there, not like I keep up with them at all anymore, but I just recall that we were all really happy to be doing what we were doing, building rockets, playing like we were going to space. You had the 6G, or I'm sorry, the 0G chair or the moon chair that you bounced around and did your stuff on. You had the floating chair that 5 degrees of freedom, where you'd float around and turn yourself upside down and do those kind of things. Yeah. The space shuttle simulator was awesome, and so it was a blast.
That's neat. So with all of that, you still ended up with a business degree. So how does that space passion end up in business like that?
Yeah. Okay. So I started with a little bit of an anecdote, trauma and good looks, which I do believe is true. That looking back, that's how I got through high school. Was not nearly as disciplined as I thought I was. But I knew from the time I left space camp that I wanted to do something in space, and every kid had a dream of being an astronaut. Kind of the joke in the space business, I was all thrust, no vector. I knew I wanted to go do something, but I didn't have good direction.
Yeah.
So I didn't have the high discipline that the engineering school required. But I had enough math and physics in my undergrad that as I was going through college, I was on a ROTC scholarship and so one of the conditions of the scholarship was it had to be technical in nature. So quantitative analysis fit the bill because I had a lot of math and it had computer programming that went along with it.
Right.
So I was able to keep my scholarship. Originally, I was going to go be an aviator. Everybody going through ROTC wants to be a fighter pilot. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. The year I graduated college was the same year that the first Gulf War ended. And when that ended, the Air Force went through a massive drawdown. So everybody out of my graduating class had their flying assignments taken away, and then only a very, very small number were given back. Only 10% were given back.
Right.
So I was on the losing end of that. I did not get my flying assignment back. So I had to fill out a dream sheet. I literally got the call during spring break. Captain Bowling was her name. She called me and she said, "Hey, Damon, got bad news, blah, blah, blah. You need to come back down to the school and fill out a dream sheet by Friday." So jettisoned my spring break plans, went back to Starkville and filled out a dream sheet. I kind of cheated on the form. It tells you have 6 choices and you can't duplicate choices. I'm like, well, if I'm not going to go fly, I want to go do some space stuff. Got out the microfiche of all the assignments in the Air Force for lieutenants, and I found a space job at the Cape, and its duty code was different than the space job in Colorado Springs. So I justified in my mind, well, I'm not really listing the same job twice. It's two
Right, they
different
have different codes.
It's two different duty codes in two different locations. So I put space as number 1 and space as number 2 on my dream sheet, and I got the second choice. So I got to be a spacecraft operations officer starting in 1992 in Colorado Springs.
What's that? What does that mean? What does that entail?
Okay, I got commissioned, sat idle for a few months, which was convenient. My wife, she had to finish up her last year of school, was brought on to active duty. I went to undergraduate space training in Denver, Colorado. So the Air Force Base then was Lowry Air Force Base. Lowry doesn't exist anymore. It was closed. But did a 12-week training program in Denver, all deep diving space stuff. So orbital mechanics, propulsion, power systems, space environment, all that kind of stuff. And then was assigned down to Colorado Springs for my first assignment, and I was given a choice. I could go be assigned to the Global Positioning System, because that was just now coming online, and most folks don't realize that GPS is actually a defense platform that we make free to the world. Or I could go work on a platform called Defense Support Program. That obscure name was a leftover from when it was highly classified. It had been declassified, and DSP was a space-based missile warning platform. I landed on DSP because just the way the schools were sequencing out, I wanted to get qualified as soon as possible. I went to DSP training following. That was another 12 weeks where you learn the subsystems, the power system, the propulsion system, the sensor platform, how you plan orbital maneuvers and how you execute those, and just on and on and on and on, all those pieces and parts. You finish that training, then I went to my squadron, my unit, did some last little bit of training, and I was certified as a crew commander December, I guess. It might have been December of 1992. So from June to December was the training cycle. And I was then 22 years old, 23 years old. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to do space stuff as a young kid, and here I am. I am operating a very large, really, really, really expensive satellite, and just having the time of my life.
That's incredible. And of course, back then there was no Space Force, right? It was pretty much mostly all Air Force, right? For the space stuff, for the most part.
Yeah. So in the space business, in the Department of Defense, Department of War, it really was. You had two major organizations. The Air Force had what we generally were the unclassified, or we refer to it as Title 10. That's just a section of federal law that the programs sit under. So Title 10 space, and then Title 50 space is the intelligence community. Mm-hmm. So back then, the organization called the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, was highly, highly classified. Just saying the word NRO, you couldn't say that.
Wow.
And it was declassified during the Clinton administration. So you could either be Air Force space missions or NRO. And then the other services like the Army, the Navy, and the Marines, they had small offerings in space, but the preponderance was in the Air Force.
Right. Okay. So how long were you a crew commander out in Colorado?
My first assignment in Colorado was from 92 to 90. Was it 96?
You were there a long time.
That sounds about it was early 96 when I left there. So three and a half years, I was a defense support program crew commander. I ended up getting qualified on a weather satellite called Defense Meteorological Satellite Program, DMSP. Did that for a while. I was an instructor on both of those platforms. Then I went and worked for the installation commander on special projects. So I've got probably one of the most obscure backgrounds of people of my age because of these special projects. So I literally worked on planetary defense using microsatellites to go do asteroid intercepts. I did that as a young captain. So microsatellites were my thing. Asteroid intercepts was my thing. I went down to White Sands as a young guy and watched Pete Conrad. He was one of the Apollo astronauts. At this time, he was working for Boeing or McDonnell on the Delta Clippers, so reusable rocket technology. Got to go see one of those demonstrations. That was the craziest thing I ever saw in my life. It was amazing. So just little projects like that I got exposed to. Then I went on after that assignment, went up the road about 2 hours away, 3 hours away to Francis E. Warren Air Force Base in southern Wyoming, and I became a nuclear weapons officer as intercontinental ballistic missile crew commander. So I did that for a little while.
Wow, you've kind of hopped around. It sounds like.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not like you weren't anywhere like super short, right? It hopped around maybe implies that you like left places after very short periods of time. It doesn't sound like that, but you definitely had a big variety.
Yes. Well, so the Air Force and the military in general, you go into a career field and you'll spend 2 or 3 years, well, as a younger person, 3 to 4 years at a installation, working a platform or set of capabilities that are part of your core mission area. So, so my core mission was space inside of the Air Force. And so the Air Force's model was to give you a couple of years in locations and get you exposed to the various missions inside of there. Because the Air Force and the other services try to grow senior leaders who have a perspective of all the stuff that's going on. So I did ICBMs for 3 years at F.E. Warren. That was pretty interesting. After F.E. Warren, I left the active duty, relocated to Birmingham, Alabama, because got my job the old-fashioned way. My college roommate and his dad started a company, a airborne remote sensing company in Birmingham, and this was right at the beginning of the digital imagery era. The company that I worked for, I don't think they'll exist anymore, but we custom built our own digital cameras, and we worked with the Swedes to build a airborne laser survey system. The technology is called LiDAR.
And now that's in your iPhone.
Well,
some version of it.
Well, so laser ranging, people are really familiar with that, and LiDAR technology is very common. But literally, we had license number 1 from the FAA.
Wow!
Because we're going to put this on a helicopter, you had to get a license from the FAA, and we had license number 1. So I did that on the commercial side. I was an instructor at Air University down in Montgomery, Alabama, teaching space stuff to lieutenants and captains. A few years later, I found myself now working for a company in Southern Virginia in the Norfolk area. So I was a space planner as a contractor for an organization in Norfolk. On the reserve side, by this time I joined the reserve, I was a space planner for an air operations center.
What does that mean?
Okay. When I'm going to nerd out just a little bit on how the Department of Defense / Department of War works. So when a military campaign is going on, and we'll use what's going on in Iran as an example. I've not done anything with respect to Iran, but I'm just using that as an example. Yeah. What the American public sees is, we've got airplanes going in and dropping bombs, or we got ships sailing and doing things, and special operators may be doing things, whatever. So they just see that happening, but in the background there's a whole planning machine that's going on. So, a combatant commander. So in this example, the commander of United States Central Command has domain-specific subordinate commanders. So you have an air component, a land component, a maritime component, and so on and so on. So inside of the air component is a air operations center, and inside the air operations center is where the air campaign is planned. And as a space person working for the Air Force, that's where I worked. So I worked in the Air Operations Center as a space planner, making sure that the theater space requirements were captured correctly and were put into action.
So this would be things like making sure satellites were where they needed to be to capture the intelligence they might need, or things like.
So at that point in my history, intel. Satellite imagery was still pretty much an intelligence community activity, but GPS, that was a big one that people always want to make sure that the GPS was dialed in correctly. You know, we could monitor the quality of GPS signals all around the world, and see how to tweak those a little bit. So that was an easy example. Satellite communications, that's an easy one. Weather satellites. So a lot of it was just making sure that the data services that we're getting from space were optimized for this given scenario.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So, did the Air Operations Center thing for a little while. Then went off and did some staff work. So staff work is critical, but probably a little boring for most listeners. Just know that I was a bureaucrat for a little bit of time.
Sure.
Went into command as a commander for the 19th Space Operations Squadron out in Colorado Springs. Was
that still part of the reserves, or
that was part of the reserve?
Okay.
But what was unique about this relationship, the 19th SOPS was paired with the 2nd Space Operations Squadron. We nicknamed ourselves Team Blackjack. So 19 plus 2 was 21.
Right.
We had patches that were the Blackjack, and we operated GPS. So as mentioned before, GPS is a defense platform. Most people don't realize that. So the entirety of the world's GPS, 100% of it, originates out of a small operations center in Colorado Springs.
Still?
Yes, still.
Wow.
Still, even today, it is about 8 to 10 people in the ops center, the majority of whom are under the age of 30. And at the time, the 19th SOPS has since gone away with the advent of the Space Force and some realignment of stuff. But at the time, I held about 45% of the world's manpower assigned to GPS. So my partner on the other side, she held the other percentage. But between the two of us, we had 100% of the manpower. I had about 40% of that manpower.
Wow.
Operating the world's GPS.
I'm going to ask kind of I don't mean to sideline us a little bit, but I'm curious, why is it that other parts of the world have not put up their own GPS satellites?
Yeah.
Or what is it that keeps it so singularly based out of one place in America?
There are several competing or complementary, depending on how you want to phrase it, capabilities. So today it's called Global Navigation Satellite Services, GNSS is kind of the generic term. But you will see platforms like Galileo is the European version of GPS. The Japanese have a platform called QZSS. I don't recall what QZSS stands for. The Russians / former Soviet Union has a platform called GLONASS. There it is, GLONASS. And the Chinese have a platform called Beidou.
Okay.
So there are competing platforms. What I would say is in the West, principally what you'll see is QZSS, GPS, and Galileo. And in Russian / Chinese aligned countries, you'll see GLONASS and Beidou.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. So you did that for a while, and then what came after that?
All right. I finished up my command in 19 SOPS. Arguably the best assignment. Well, it's one of the top 2 assignments. I'll say it that way.
Okay.
So left 19 SOPS, went to DC. Again, I'm a reservist at this point, but I'm actually a full-time reservist on long-term orders. Went to the Pentagon, worked on the air staff and the Office of Secretary of Defense. I worked up there for just a little bit, then went back to Colorado where I was the wing commander of the reserve wing. So that so between my squadron commander and my wing command, those are the 2 best jobs that I had. And when I was the wing commander, I had 1,500 people that worked for me, covering 9 different space missions.
Wow.
So weather, satellites, GPS, missile warning, space electronic warfare, instructors, just a whole gamut of things going on out there in Colorado Springs. Did that. When I left command, I then became the vice commander at 10th Air Force down in Texas. 10th Air Force is where the reserve puts all of its combat forces. So I was supervising a couple of F-16 units, an F-35 unit, an F-22 unit, an A-10 unit, B-52. Rescue, special operations, cyber, and intelligence units. So 17,000 people assigned. I think it was 14 subordinate units, I think is what it was. Did that for just a short period of time. Well, it was 2 years. Went out to Colorado, got reassigned to Vandenberg, California, where I was working for then, was he major? I guess he was Major General, might be Lieutenant General at that point. Steve Whiting, who's now the commander of U.S. Space Command.
Okay.
Going to be moving here to Huntsville pretty soon. Worked for General Whiting as his senior reservist at Joint Forces Component Command for Space. So doing tons of space stuff at a global level. Again, about 18,000-ish people that worked for us. Did that for a little while.
At what point?
Yeah.
What year are we at now?
This would have been, that would have been in like the 2018, 2019 time frame. So worked for General Whiting was probably my shortest career in the entire time in the Air Force. That was right at a year, because right behind that was when United States Space Command was established.
Were you excited about that?
I was, yeah. Well, so U.S. Space Command existed when I was a lieutenant, just in a different form. It was de-established in 2002 and reestablished just a couple of years ago. But I was then assigned to the operations directorate. So I was a general officer by this point. I was on the general officer staff. Went to headquarters, U.S. Space Command in Colorado Springs, in the operations directorate, where basically we managed and oversaw. One, we built the organization. And when I say we, it's guys like me, Tom James, Rock Miller, Rick Zellman, guys like that who are still in the business. We built the J3, but we basically just ran global operations for U.S. Space Command. Then my final job while serving was at Headquarters Space Force, where I was the Deputy Director for Strategy, Budgets, and Requirements for Space Force.
When did you become Brigadier General? Because that's
that was 2028. I'm sorry, 2018. Yeah, we haven't reached 2028 yet. So 2018.
Okay.
It was, yeah.
So as a Brigadier General for Space Force, like, first of all, let me ask, what's the transition like when you move from the Air Force to the Space Force once it's officially found? What was that experience like as things changed?
When I finished, I was still in the Air Force, but I was attached to the Space Force staff. During this transition phase, when the Space Force was being established, the enabling law made it really clear about what to do with the active duty members. So the active duty built their force structure, and over the course of several months to a couple of years, we're bringing chunks of people over out of the Air Force, out of the Army, out of the Navy, into the Space Force.
So it was really just kind of a smooth, almost transfer, sort of.
In many ways, it was. The Guard and Reserve were the enabling language that Congress put into law was a little blurry, so that took some time to work out. On the reserve side, it's only just been the past 2 years since I retired that got cleared up enough so that reservists could move over to the Space Force. What's actually happening is that the Space Force is not going to have a reserve or a National Guard the way the Army and the Navy and the Air Force have. The Navy doesn't have a Guard, but I think you get my point.
Yeah.
So the Space Force just has one component. But that one component can either be in a activated status or an inactivated status. Okay. So instead of having just a distinct reserve the way the Air Force does, you just have one body in the Space Force, and you can have various duty statuses within that.
So you would be inactive if you were in the reserve kind of position. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So as a Brigadier General, so I'm fascinated by this because that's the big title, right? That everybody thinks of. Tell me what do you do as a Brigadier General in the Space Force?
Yeah. First off, being selected for general is an amazingly humbling thing because you by this time in your life you have worked with so many amazing, awesome people, and being selected there are a lot of factors that go into it. Sometimes it's timing. I was able to get a certain assignment that a friend of mine who was of equal or greater competence just wasn't able to because the timing worked out a certain way. So there's tons of things that off-ramp friends of mine who I thought were equally, if not more capable than I was. And Brigadier General is just the first of 4 general officer ranks.
Right.
So I was a 1-star general. The chief of the Space Force is a 4-star general. So there's a couple of ranks in between there. But that's where you really get into the executive leadership of the enterprise. Like I said, my first assignment as a general officer, I was the vice commander at 10th Air Force. So I had 17,000-ish, 18,000-ish folks. I think the number was 500 aircraft in the portfolio, in missions galore. So I had to just kind of run the organization. When I got over onto the space side, went back to the space business, that was when JFCC Space was still up and running, but then Space Command was starting. So like one of the first things that I did, sounds very mundane but very critical. We had to have a establishing directive, which is basically a business plan.
Right.
What was the business plan for satellite communications for U.S. Space Command? So I wrote the draft of what's the business plan. We call it an establishing directive, but it's the business plan. And then, so that's a background bureaucratic kind of thing. But then you have ongoing global operations. So we monitored what's going on around the world, and we gave advice and guidance to our staff to create tasks and make sure that the fielded force of space assets were doing the right things for a campaign. One of the more interesting things that I got to do when I was at U.S. Space Command was my last two jobs, or last two major tasks there before I was reassigned. I was appointed the exercise commander. So I was a 1-star playing the role of the 4-star for his global exercise. So I was running the global exercise campaign, and that went on for about a week or 10 days. So every day I was playing the commander, and then I would report out to the real commander and go, "Hey, sir, here's kind of what we learned today, my observations." And I owed him like the after-action report. "Sir, here's the training and readiness of your force."
Right.
So I got to evaluate the entirety of U.S. Space Command and how we did in this global exercise. That was kind of cool.
Yeah.
The other thing that I got to do, which was pretty cool, couldn't talk about it then, but can talk about it now, was this was also the same time frame of when Russia had a anti-satellite demonstration in space, and they knocked out a satellite. I worked the training product for the commander, because the commander, one of his responsibilities is when certain things of prominence occur, he gets on a network and talks to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense and maybe even the president. And so those are tightly scripted events, and he has to be able to communicate a lot of information in a short period of time. So I built the training products for the scenario of a ASAT and walked him through it several times, and then lo and behold, a few weeks later, he got to put it into action. It happened for real, and so I'd like to say I had a little bit to do with that activity. So
That's pretty neat.
that was kind of cool. My last general officer job at Headquarters Space Force, we did things like created the policy for international partnerships. That fell under me. The budget for the Space Force. At the time, the annual budget was about $6 billion. This year, the president's budget for the Space Force is $71.5. The president has asked Congress for $71.5 billion. So it's grown by an order of magnitude in just a short period of time. But the team that I supervised built the budget for the Space Force. So that's kind of cool.
That's awesome. So is there anything in your we'll talk about the Space Force Association and kind of what you're doing now in just a second, but just to kind of wrap up with all of the things that you did during your career proper. Yeah. Is there any story or thing that you'd like to share that was maybe that folks might find interesting that you're able to talk about from any point in that career that that would be fun?
The fun part, there were so many things that were fun day in and day out. I found myself doing some really amazing things that I never thought I'd be able to do. So let's go back to the beginning of your opening question. My dad was a factory worker who got laid off, and he was a car salesman at the back end of his professional life. My mom was a stay-at-home mom until my sister and I started school. Then she went through nursing school, and she was a nurse. So we came from very, I don't want to say low means, but we certainly were not, wealthy by any stretch, barely middle class, if that. both sets of parents' families were very poor, very rural. And for me to grow up and have this kind of idea of doing some space stuff and then to end up doing it, that was just super cool.
Yeah.
I'll say this, at one point I was a commander of a space wing. This is before the Space Force. The preponderance of space missions were in the Air Force. Okay, to paint the picture, in the active duty Air Force at that moment in history, there were 5 active duty space wings and 1 reserve space wing. So there were only 6 space wing commanders in the entirety of the Department of Defense at the time. And I got to be one of them at that moment in time. In some regards, it's more selective to become a space wing commander than an astronaut.
Sure. Yeah.
So now I'll say being an astronaut is probably pretty dang cool. I mean, I don't take anything away from those folks. They get. I've got some friends who are astronauts, and they have got to do some amazing things. But my peers, my friends, when we were commanders together, are just amazing people, great people, and they are building the Space Force right now. Doug Shess just got nominated as the next Chief of Space Operations for the Space Force. We were wing commanders together. Deanna Burt, she just retired a year ago. She was the Chief Operations Officer for the Space Force. Chance Saltzman, General Chance Saltzman, he is the current Chief of Space Operations. He was a little bit ahead of me, but we worked together a couple of times throughout my career. So getting to work with arguably some of the best talent that this nation has to offer is probably the cool thing.
Nice. Well, now that you have retired, let me make sure that's correct. You've retired from Space Force.
Correct. So I retired from the military 3 years ago.
Okay. And since then, you have now been you're now the CEO of the Space Force Association.
That's right.
So this is a nonprofit. Tell me about what you do.
Yeah, the Space Force Association actually predates the Space Force by a couple of months. It was established in 2019. At that moment in history, Congress was debating whether or not to have a Space Corps inside of the Air Force or to do something different, and the Space Force Association was established to advocate for a separate and distinct Space Force. Okay, so that's just a little bit of the history. What we do is the Space Force Association is a nonprofit, so we are a 501c3 nonprofit. And we are also a national military association, which really means we align ourselves to the benefit of a particular service, in this case the Space Force, and we advocate for the service, its members, and in the case of the Space Force, we also advocate for U.S.-led security in space. What does that mean kind of in practical terms? We do things with respect to the service. We help advocate. We publish op-eds, thought pieces, special studies, host activities in the D.C. area to help amplify what goes on inside of the Space Force, help members of Congress understand that. Our chapters across the country reach out into the communities to make sure that they understand what the Space Force is doing. Then for the Guardians, we do things such as professional development activities for them. Lastly, on this advocating for U.S.-led security, that's also one of these places where we do things such as thought pieces, op-eds, events in the community, and even partner ourselves with organizations that have kind of like-minded activities, like AIAA, the American, oh gosh, we're going to have to re-edit this one.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Take a second.
American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. There we go. We partner with AIAA, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. We partner with the Space Foundation to collaborate on presenting content at symposiums and trade shows and things like that to work together and promote the Space Force and its missions. We've got 5,000 folks in the association across the country and about 20 chapters.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, you also do a little bit here with the Space and Rocket Center, right? You're about to have a big event coming up, right?
Yeah. Yeah. This year, so in 2026, I'll be inducted into the Space Camp Hall of Fame. Which is really, really cool. I mean, as a kid, Space Camp was very formative in my life. What I did here really catalyzed and crystallized to me that I want to do something in the space business. There was not such a thing as a Space Camp Alumni Group or a Space Camp Hall of Fame at that moment in time. That came along many years later, and to be nominated and then to be selected is pretty cool. What makes this one even a little more special is a couple of friends of mine are on the same cohort as I am.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's been neat.
Very nice. All right.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything that we've missed that you would you think that we'd like to hear about that you'd want to share?
Oh gosh. For the audience that you've got here, I would say that they're already biased towards the mission of the Space and Rocket Center and biased towards the mission of Space Camp and things like that.
Yeah.
But don't discount what the organization does. It's easy if you're a parent and you're just kind of in the daily throes of parenting. Shuttling your kids back and forth to their ballet or recitals or sports events, whatever, and the kid comes in and goes, "Oh, hey, I want to go to Space Camp," and you just and you just kind of, as a parent, you just let that wash over you. You sign up and you send your kid. Space Camp for me and for thousands and thousands of kids, it's highly transformational. So if your kid wants to do something like Space Camp or any of these STEM-centric summer camps, they really can be life-changing events if you support your kid, your child, and lean into it just a little bit. I am not confident that I would have landed where I landed had it not been for my Aunt Rebecca, who in part because her brother, was unemployed at the time, and she was trying to do something nice for her brother, but for her nephew who had this kind of interest and she wanted to feed the interest. That I tell folks that small set of decisions that she did, completely changed my life. So I offer that back to parents who or family members who are considering sending a kid to Space Camp. It really can change their lives.
Awesome. All right. Well, we always close out with the same two questions of everyone.
Yeah.
So my first question is, if you had a chance to go to space, assuming that you have not been.
I can't comment on that.
Right.
No.
But if you had the chance to go to space, would you go today?
Oh, yeah. At the end of the day, it is still an amazing human achievement that we are able to do something like this. Just a few weeks ago, we had Artemis, where we sent humans to the farthest reaches that they've ever gone before.
Yeah,
that's amazing. I've got several friends who are astronauts, and what they do is amazing. Even just the quick jaunts that like Blue Origin was doing, those transform people's lives. I think I would want to go for longer than 15 minutes, but yeah, if I could, I would.
I kind of feel the same way. If you're going to take that risk,
yeah,
let's make it worthwhile.
Yeah, the hardest part is the most dangerous part is launch and reentry.
Right.
So you're spending 90% of your time in the most dangerous part of the flight profile. So let's enjoy it. Get to space, make a few trips around, and then come back down.
Yeah. All right. Then the last question is, if you had any advice to give a young person today who is thinking about a career in the Air Force or Space Force or any type of aeronautic or space industry, what kind of advice would you give?
I would say first, specific to the military, it's a fantastic calling. It widened my perspective on my fellow Americans. I worked with fantastic people from across the country. I can now drop. My wife jokes, and it's not much of an exaggeration. I can go to just about any major city in the U.S. and chances are I've got friends there because I worked with them. And some of the stories that I get to tell my family and friends are some pretty good stories. So definitely consider it. It may not be for you, but definitely consider it. But for kids who are like looking at the space ecosystem, I'll say this. This industry very much needs people who are STEM educated, who are STEM experts. So think about your science degrees and your engineering degrees. But this ecosystem needs skilled tradespeople. So think about machinists, fabricators, electricians, things like that to build the heavy infrastructure and to build some of the platforms. And this ecosystem also needs people who are space literate to run the business side. So run your marketing departments, run your accounting departments, run your contracting offices, run your legal departments.
Yeah.
those types of things. So just because you aren't a STEM person, if STEM's not your jam, that's okay. Space can still be your jam. You can still go be in the space business.
Wonderful. All right. I think we're good.
Thanks.